Time stops for no one, they say. But what happens when time itself becomes a weapon? When the steady tick of a clock masks the rhythm of revenge? And when the man who measures minutes for others finds himself racing against his own final hour? Tonight, we venture into the workshop of Riverside's most precise citizen, where punctuality was sacred, trust was currency, and where the difference between life and death could be measured in seconds. Join me as we uncover a tale where time reveals its cruelest secret, that some wounds never heal, no matter how many years pass by.
March 1953. Riverside was awakening from its long winter slumber. The river ice was beginning to crack with sounds that echoed through the town like distant gunshots, and the first green shoots were emerging through the snow that still lingered in the shadowed corners of the streets. Life was returning to its normal rhythm on Oak Street, the commercial artery that pulsed at the heart of Riverside. Shopkeepers swept their sidewalks with renewed vigor, children played in puddles of melted water, and the air carried that indefinable promise of renewal that only spring can bring. At 47 Oak Street, nestled between Mueller's Pharmacy and Mrs. Patterson's fabric store, stood one of Riverside's most respected institutions, the Whitmore and Son Clockmaker's Workshop. The storefront displayed an impressive collection of wall clocks, alarm clocks, and chronometers, all kept in perfect synchronization. Inside the workshop, time seemed to have its own personality. The air vibrated with a chorus of tick-tocks in different tones, creating a mechanical symphony that few could appreciate. The walls were covered with shelves full of clocks awaiting repair, each with its own silent story. Edgar Whitmore was a man who lived by the numbers on the clock. At 58 years old, he had graying hair, always combed with mathematical precision, thick lens glasses that magnified his blue eyes, and hands that moved with surgeon-like precision when handling the delicate gears that were his passion. For Edgar, each clock was more than an object. It was a living creature that breathed at regular intervals. He knew the temperament of each mechanism, could tell when a pendulum was melancholy or when a spring needed encouragement. His reputation extended far beyond Riverside. Collectors from Chicago and Milwaukee sent their most precious pieces to his skilled hands. The workshop was a sanctuary of trust. Farmers brought pocket watches inherited from their grandfathers. Housewives entrusted him with alarm clocks that organized their morning routines. And even Reverend Hayes depended on Whitmore to keep the church clock marking time for Sunday prayers. Edgar was a man of inflexible habits. He opened the workshop at 7 a.m. sharp, stopped for lunch at 12, and closed at 6 p.m. without exception. His punctuality was so reliable that Riverside residents set their own clocks by the rhythm of his daily activities. His house on Cedar Avenue was a reflection of his meticulous personality. Each room had its own clock, all synchronized to the second. Edgar had lived alone since his wife Martha's death 5 years earlier, and found comfort in the constant company of his mechanical creations. Martha had been the only person capable of breaking Edgar's rigidity, bringing spontaneity to his ordered life. Her death from pneumonia had left a void that not even the most precise gears could fill. Since then, Edgar had dedicated himself even more intensely to his work, as if each repaired clock was a small victory against the time that had taken his beloved. But not even Edgar Whitmore, master of time, could predict that his meticulously ordered life was about to be disturbed by a secret that had remained dormant for decades. A secret that would transform his peaceful workshop into the stage for a revenge that had been measured not in minutes or hours, but in years of silent patience.
Monday, March 23rd, 1953. Edgar Whitmore followed his morning routine with the precision of a religious ritual. Unlock the door, turn on the lights, check each clock in the display case, prepare his tools for the day. Everything exactly as he had done for 23 years. But this morning, something was different. On his workbench, exactly in the center, there was a clock he didn't recognize. It was an antique pocket watch made of tarnished silver, with a delicate chain and a cover that reflected the morning light almost hypnotically. The watch was extraordinarily beautiful, with intricate engravings on the cover and what appeared to be initials, R.M. Edgar examined the piece with growing perplexity. How had it gotten there? His workshop was always locked, and he was the only one who had the key. Edgar checked every possible entry point. The door lock was intact, the windows remained locked from the inside, and there were no signs of forced entry. It was as if the watch had simply materialized during the night, left there by phantom hands. When Edgar opened the watch's cover, his expression changed dramatically. Inside, engraved on the golden surface, was an inscription that made his blood run cold. For Robert, who always arrived on time. With love, Elena. 1925. 1925. Edgar was only 30 years old and worked as an apprentice in Mr. Heinrich Müller's workshop, father of the current pharmacist. At that time, he was still learning the secrets of clockmaking, and his life was about to be changed forever by a man named Robert Morrison. Robert Morrison was a watch salesman who regularly visited Riverside, bringing rare pieces to local collectors. He was charismatic, well-dressed, and possessed impressive knowledge about timekeeping. Edgar admired him deeply and dreamed of having his own workshop someday. But Robert wasn't only interested in business. He had fallen in love with Elena Kowalski, the local baker's daughter, a young woman of rare beauty who had captured the hearts of several men in Riverside. Elena was gentle, intelligent, and seemed equally enchanted by the charming salesman. But what Robert didn't know was that Edgar also loved Elena in silence. For months, he had watched from afar, without the courage to express his feelings. When Robert appeared and won Elena's heart with ease, Edgar felt as if his heart had been shattered by sharp gears. Back in the present, Edgar felt the same emotions he had buried for almost 30 years. The watch in his hands was the same one Elena had given Robert as an engagement gift. He remembered perfectly the day Robert had proudly shown the gift to everyone in town. Edgar searched through his personal files, looking for any reference to Robert Morrison. What he found left him even more disturbed. According to his records, Robert had died in a train accident in 1926, just 1 year after his engagement to Elena. At that moment,
the workshop door opened, and a man Edgar didn't immediately recognize entered. He was tall, thin, with graying hair and a dark overcoat that gave him an almost spectral appearance. His eyes were ice blue and seemed to pierce the soul. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore," said the man with a voice that carried an accent Edgar couldn't identify. "I believe you found my watch." The stranger pointed to the piece Edgar was still holding, and his smile was sharp as a blade. Edgar felt a chill run down his spine. "Your watch? I'm sorry, but I don't understand. How did it get here?" The stranger moved closer, and Edgar could see that his eyes had a disturbing quality, as if there was something familiar about them, something that awakened memories he preferred to keep buried. "My name is Robert Morrison," said the man, and the words hit Edgar like a punch to the stomach. "I believe we met a long time ago. I used to visit this town regularly until certain circumstances forced me to leave." Edgar felt the world spin around him. Robert Morrison had been dead for almost 30 years. He had seen the obituary in the newspaper, had attended the funeral, but the man before him knew details that only the real Robert could know. "You've done good work here, Edgar," said Robert, examining the clocks with expert eyes. "Much better than I expected from a simple apprentice. But then, you were always good at taking what wasn't yours." Edgar didn't understand what Robert meant, but there was something in the way he looked at the workshop, as if he were evaluating not just the clocks, but Edgar himself. It was the look of a predator studying its prey. "I'll return tomorrow to collect what's mine," said Robert, his voice loaded with veiled threat. "And Edgar, I hope you've used all these years well, because time has finally run out." When the door closed, Edgar found himself alone with the watch that had unleashed this nightmare. But the questions multiplied like defective gears. How was Robert alive? What did he want? And why did Edgar have the terrible feeling that he was about to pay for a crime he didn't remember committing?
Edgar closed the workshop 2 hours early, something he had never done in his adult life. He needed answers, and there was only one place he could find them: the Riverside Herald archives, where all the town's secrets were eventually recorded. Riverside's public library occupied a Victorian building on Elm Street with shelves reaching to the ceiling and the characteristic smell of aged paper. Mrs. Dorothy Hennings, the librarian, knew every document filed since 1889. Edgar searched through Herald editions from 1925 and 1926, looking for any mention of Robert Morrison. What he found left him even more confused. The obituary was there, dated April 15, 1926. Robert Morrison, 34, died in railroad accident near Springfield. But there was something strange about the obituary. The physical description didn't perfectly match the man Edgar remembered. The age was wrong by 2 years, and it mentioned a facial scar that Robert had never had. It was as if someone had deliberately provided incorrect information. A few pages later, Edgar found a news item that chilled his blood. Elena Kowalski marries Edgar Whitmore, dated May 22, 1926, just 5 weeks after Robert's death. The speed of the marriage had caused comments in town. The memories returned like a painful flood. Elena had been devastated by Robert's death.
Edgar had offered a friendly shoulder, comfort, and gradually his consolation had transformed into something more. She had agreed to marry him not for love, but out of need for emotional security. The marriage had never been truly happy. Elena remained distant, melancholy, as if part of her had died with Robert. Edgar tried to win her love through dedication and care, but always knew he occupied second place in her heart. That night, Edgar searched his own house like a detective looking for clues. In the attic, among Martha's belongings, he found a box he had never seen before. Inside was a stack of yellowed letters, all addressed to Elena and signed with a simple R. The letters were dated 1927, 1928, 1929, years after Robert's supposed death. They spoke of eternal love, broken promises, of a man who had been forced to fake his own death to escape gambling debts in Chicago. The truth emerged like a broken gear finally coming loose. Robert Morrison hadn't died in 1926. He had staged his own death to escape dangerous creditors, leaving Elena behind with the promise that he would return for her when it was safe. The letters revealed Elena's suffering. She had waited for Robert, refusing to completely believe in his death. When the letters began arriving, she realized she had been abandoned for love and had married Edgar out of desperation.
The last letter, dated 1929, was different from the others. The tone was bitter, threatening. Robert had discovered that Elena had married Edgar and promised to return to settle accounts with everyone who had benefited from his absence. Edgar understood that Elena had carried the secret until her death. She had never told about the letters, never revealed that Robert was alive. She had protected Edgar from a truth that could have destroyed his life. The next morning, Edgar returned to the workshop with a mixture of fear and determination. Robert had promised to return, and Edgar knew that this time there would be no avoiding the confrontation that had been postponed for almost 30 years. Robert was there, sitting in a chair as if he owned the place. He had aged, but his eyes maintained the same intensity Edgar remembered. There was a gun on the table, casually placed beside dismantled clocks. "You read the letters," said Robert, and it wasn't a question. "Good. That saves time. You know why I'm here." Edgar nodded, his voice almost a whisper. "You want Elena back, but she's been dead for 5 years." Robert laughed, a sound without humor. "Elena? No, Edgar. Elena made her choice. I came to collect what you stole from me. My life, my town, my place in the world. You built all this on my fake death, and now it's time to pay." Edgar finally understood. Robert hadn't returned for lost love or nostalgia. He had returned for pure revenge, fed by decades of bitterness. The man who had faked his own death had transformed into something far more dangerous than Edgar could have imagined.
Robert stood up with calculated movements, the gun now in his hands. "You lived my life, Edgar. Married my fiancée, built the business I should have had, earned the respect that should have been mine. Now let's settle these accounts." Edgar forced himself to remain calm, his hands instinctively touching the clockmaking tools on his workbench. "Robert, you chose to fake your death. Nobody forced you to abandon Elena. You made that decision out of fear of creditors." "Fear!" Robert shouted, the mask of civility finally falling. "I did what I had to do to survive. But I came back for Elena and found her married to you. You took advantage of my absence to steal my life." Edgar realized that no reasoning could reach Robert. Decades of bitterness had poisoned his mind. Discreetly, Edgar moved his hand toward a heavy screwdriver
his only available weapon. "Don't move," said Robert, his voice now dangerously calm. "You're going to sit in that chair and listen to exactly how your life is going to end. Slowly, painfully, like mine ended the day I discovered Elena had married you." Edgar sat down, but his mind was working frantically. He knew every inch of his workshop, every tool, every possible advantage. Robert had chosen the wrong setting for his revenge. He was in Edgar's territory now. Robert began recounting years of planning, how he had watched Edgar from afar, learned his habits, waited for the perfect moment. The more he talked, the more he relaxed his guard, lost in his own narrative of injustice. Edgar knew the wall clock would strike noon in exactly 30 seconds. The sound was loud, deafening, capable of startling anyone not accustomed to it. Robert didn't know this, but Edgar had lived with that sound for decades. 20 seconds. Edgar breathed deeply, preparing himself. 15 seconds. His hand moved imperceptibly toward the screwdriver. 10 seconds. Robert continued his monologue, unconscious of the passing time.
Dung! The clock sounded like a cannon in the silent workshop. Robert, startled, instinctively turning toward the sound. Edgar took advantage of the moment of distraction, lunging forward and striking Robert's wrist with the screwdriver. The gun flew through the air, colliding with a shelf of clocks that collapsed in a cacophony of interrupted tick-tocks. Robert recovered quickly, stronger and younger than Edgar, but less familiar with the terrain. Edgar used every advantage the environment offered. He pushed Robert against the workbench, where sharp tools became dangerous obstacles. Decades of precise work had given Edgar surprising strength in his arms and hands. Robert stumbled on the clock scattered across the floor, his urban elegance useless against Edgar's familiarity with every loose board, every dangerous corner. Edgar managed to reach the gun first, his hands trembling as he pointed it at the man who had haunted his life. "It's over, Robert," said Edgar, his voice surprisingly firm. "You had your chance to live a new life. You chose to waste it on revenge." Robert smiled, even when cornered. "You don't have the courage to shoot Edgar. You never had the courage for anything." For a moment that seemed eternal, Edgar fought with himself. Decades of pacifism battled survival instinct. His hands trembled, and Robert perceived the hesitation. Robert interpreted hesitation as weakness and prepared to attack again. But Edgar had made his decision, not to kill, but to survive. When Robert lunged, Edgar dodged and struck him with the gun's handle. Robert fell heavily, his head colliding with the corner of the workbench. The sound was dry, final. Edgar checked his pulse. Robert was still alive, but unconscious. There was no more time for moral decisions. Edgar ran to the phone, his hand still trembling as he dialed Sheriff Carter. "Ben, I need you at my workshop, now, and bring handcuffs." The voice on the other end responded with concern. "Edgar, are you okay? What happened?" "I'm fine, Ben, but I have a lot to explain, and you won't believe what I'm going to tell you." Edgar looked at the unconscious Robert, surrounded by broken clocks, and realized that time had finally caught up with all the secrets of the past.
Robert Morrison was taken to Riverside Hospital, where he was treated for a severe concussion. Under police guard, he awoke to face not only the consequences of his attempted murder, but also decades of crimes he had committed under false identities. Sheriff Carter's investigation revealed that Robert had spent the last 28 years building a criminal career in various cities. Fraud, extortion, even 2 murders were linked to the man who had faked his death in Riverside. Edgar handed over Robert's letters to the authorities, providing crucial evidence about the timeline of crimes. Each letter was a piece of the puzzle that helped build the case against the man who had haunted his life. The Riverside community reacted with a mixture of shock and solidarity. Neighbors who had known Edgar for decades couldn't believe that the gentleman who repaired their clocks had been forced to fight for his own life. The ladies of the Methodist Church organized a campaign to clean and repair his workshop. Edgar's workshop had been devastated during the fight. Century-old clocks lay in pieces on the floor, their gears scattered like mechanical tears. But the community mobilized like a family. Tom Bradley, the carpenter, repaired the damaged shelves. The school children helped organize the smaller pieces, transforming the tragedy into a community project. When Edgar returned to his workshop 3 days later, he found not only the space restored, but also a pile of clocks brought by neighbors who wanted to support him. "So you have work while you recover," said Mrs. Patterson, the fabric store lady, handing him an antique wall clock that had belonged to her family for generations. But the most touching surprise came when Edgar found a letter hidden in a secret drawer of his work desk, a letter that Elena had left before dying. "My dear Edgar," read the letter in her delicate handwriting. "If you're reading this, then Robert has finally returned, as I always feared would happen. I never had the courage to tell you about the letters, about the truth, but I want you to know that although I married you out of necessity, I learned to truly love you. You gave me a life of peace and security that Robert could never have offered. If something happens, please don't blame yourself. You saved my life in more ways than you imagine." Robert Morrison was sentenced to life in prison for the multiple crimes committed over 3 decades. The man who had faked his death to escape responsibility would finally face the consequences of his choices. He was transferred to Joliet State Penitentiary, where he would spend the rest of his days. Edgar visited Elena's grave for the first time since the funeral 5 years earlier. He placed fresh flowers on the headstone and whispered, "Thank you for protecting me, even after you left. Now I can finally live in peace, knowing that you chose to stay with me for love, not just necessity." The Whitmore and Son workshop reopened its doors a week after the incident. Customers returned gradually, many bringing clocks that didn't even need repair, just wanting to support the man who had become a silent hero in his own life. The familiar routine of ticking returned to fill the space, but now it carried a different quality, the sound of finally conquered peace.
6 months later, autumn painted Riverside in golden and red tones. The town had returned to its tranquil rhythm, but Edgar Whitmore had changed in subtle yet significant ways. He still opened his workshop punctually at 7 a.m., but now occasionally stopped to chat with neighbors, allowing life to flow a bit more freely around his rigid routine. Edgar was finishing a special project, a wall clock he had started weeks before. It wasn't a commission, it was a gift to himself, a silent celebration of his newly conquered freedom. Each gear was placed with extra care, each adjustment made with genuine love for the art that had defined his life. When the bells of the Methodist Church rang noon, Edgar stopped his work and simply listened. For decades, this sound had been just a temporal marker in his routine. Now he could hear the beauty in the reverberation, the way the sound spread through the city like a sonic embrace. The door opened and Tommy Fletcher entered, a 16-year-old whose eyes shone with the same fascination for precise mechanisms that Edgar had felt decades before. "Mr. Whitmore," said Tommy shyly, "my father said you might be needing an apprentice."
Edgar smiled, remembering himself at the same age, equally nervous and hopeful. "Yes, Tommy, I think I could use some help. But first, let me tell you something important about time. It's not just about seconds and minutes. It's about patience, precision, and mainly about never giving up on doing the right thing." Edgar began teaching Tommy the fundamentals of clockmaking, passing on not just technical knowledge, but also the wisdom he had acquired through decades of dedication and recently through an ordeal that tested his courage in ways he never could have imagined possible. At the end of the day, Edgar closed the workshop with Tommy by his side. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. He had found not just peace with his past, but also hope for the future. The legacy of Whitmore and Son would continue, but now with new meaning, not just about repairing clocks, but about repairing lives. Edgar had decided to repair Robert's pocket watch, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder that even the most damaged mechanisms can be restored with patience and care. The watch now worked perfectly, its gears moving in harmony, marking time with impeccable precision. He placed the watch in a special display case in the workshop, not for sale, but as a silent testimony that time, though relentless, can also be a healer. Past wounds can heal, secrets can be revealed, and justice, even when delayed, eventually finds its way. Riverside fell asleep that night with the tranquility of a town that had confronted its ghosts and survived. In houses scattered throughout the city, clocks repaired by Edgar Whitmore marked time with renewed precision. Each tick-tock a reminder that life goes on, that time heals, and that even the darkest secrets eventually find the light.
And so we conclude another chapter of the mysteries of Riverside, a town where time is measured not just in hours and minutes, but in lessons learned, courage discovered, and peace finally conquered. Edgar Whitmore had discovered that the true secret of clockmaking wasn't in controlling time, but in learning to live in harmony with it. Until our next visit to Riverside, remember, time may be the most relentless of judges, but it can also be the most merciful of healers. Good night.